Good morning.
This is Oscar from Dr. Earth, and I'm Allison.
Dr. Earth has been around for now close to 30 years. It was started in Santa Monica, California. The owner was the first one to kind of revolutionize organics, and the way he did that was he added living organisms to fertilizers. It wasn't being done before Dr. Earth. It's kind of the claim to fame for Dr. Earth was the introduction of organic beneficial microbes, mycorrhizae. So with organics, it's all about breaking stuff down. So the faster it breaks down, the better it's going to perform. So with having microbes introduced to organic fertilizers, think of like the microbes as Pac-Man, and all they do is eat what the fertilizer is made out of, and they actually convert it into food. The more microbes, the faster things break down. So the faster your fertilizer will break down. All the organic matter that's in soil, like wood pieces, amendments, all that breaks down faster with microbes. Mycorrhiza is actually a fungi that attaches itself to roots and colonizes and helps break down and utilize all the nutrients that the microbes are breaking down and uptake it to your plant. You always want to keep feeding those microbes. So every time you amend, every time you put a fertilizer, basically an organic fertilizer is you're amending soil basically. But you're basically feeding those microbes, and really that's what you're really doing. If there's no microbes present, it's going to take a lot longer for that fertilizer to break down and turn into food. So planting mix, what we recommend that for is for raised beds, or you could use it straight alone, or you could mix it 50-50 with the native soil. People usually are doing raised beds now because usually almost anywhere you go, people have bad soil usually, and they don't want to wait. It's kind of instant gratification. If you're going to use native soil, to use a 50-50 with our homegrown, which is our vegetable planting mix. The potting soils, you're getting more of perlite, better drainage, so it's, think of it as a big giant container. You want it to drain well. So our fruit tree planting mix has our fruit tree fertilizer in it. So right off the bat, for at least 30 days, you don't really have to fertilize when you use fruit tree planting mix. That's going to be enough. If somebody wanted to plant in that straight direct and use no fertilizer when they first put their tree down, you really don't need it. All of our planting mixes, our potting soils have our true biotics, which have the mycorrhiza, have microbes in it, so you're already off to a really good start. Some guys will add pumice, or some guys will add, depending on what they're doing with it, but you really don't have to. Our homegrown premium potting soil was originally designed for the cannabis industry. It's more, it's our production garden potting soil. It's in a black bag, and then this is our other one right here, which is our pot of gold. And the big differences between both of these is that this one right here is more perlite. It drains a little faster, and there's more amendment in this one. For somebody who's looking for quick production, likes to feed a lot more often, I recommend that. It's not only for cannabis growers. I do tomatoes, and I do all my tomatoes in containers, and I use this guy because I like to feed more often. If you really don't like feeding a lot, if you just want something, hey, I just want to put something in, then I recommend our pot of gold. It works very, very well. It works well with tomatoes, but this one will drain faster, and it allows you to refertilize or and amend it a little bit quicker. Typically, when it comes to potting soils, it's pretty complete. They're meant to stand alone. It's not meant to be mixed with anything. You can, but you don't have to. It's really meant for a container. If somebody's going in the ground, planting their fruit tree in the ground, and they're mixing it with native soil, typically in this area the native soil is not that great. I also recommend putting another fertilizer, so that's way you're adding more nutrients to that soil. So usually if you have really healthy soil already and you're using that, then you really don't have to. Because say somebody comes in here and already has an existing fruit tree, and they want to spruce it up and revitalize it for the season, they could buy a good fertilizer, follow the instructions of the fertilizer, scratch it in, and then usually about an inch or an inch to 2 inches they could put on top and use it as a mulch. And it works very, very well. And when you water, it's also kind of fertilizing as well, but it just gives it more organic matter for microbes to really get busy and do their things. What's the difference between synthetics and organics is that organics works off of Mother Nature, and Mother Nature is all microbes and living organisms that are breaking that down, versus a synthetic, it's pretty much ready to go. You don't need the microbes. With a lot of organic fertilizers, if you look at the application rate, you're applying it less frequently than a synthetic because it's working differently. Application rates of synthetics, a lot of them it's more frequently than an organic because it's not staying in the soil around. It doesn't work like an organic. And an organic stays in the soil a lot longer. So the plant can feed on it off of it when it wants to, versus the only time is when you're actually feeding it with a synthetic.
Okay.
Osmocote is a synthetic fertilizer, but it's a time release. So every time you water it, it releases some of its fertilizer. So that's an exception, but like one that everybody knows, like a Miracle-Gro type of fertilizer. It's water soluble. You're mixing it with water. When you water just keeps traveling. So when you're using it, it'll uptake. But then once it's gone, and then that's why you have to apply almost every week, because you got to keep that nutrient around for the plant. If you have somebody that comes in here and says, hey, you know what, I have a garden, I want to make it look good, but I don't want to do a lot of work, I would always recommend an organic. I don't let my plants get bone dry. What I mean by drying, where it's still moist, but it's not real saturated wet. So it lets you be able to water more frequently. And every time I water, I end up doing it with a compost tea. So that's the real big difference. Yeah. But you dry up quickly enough where you could water it more frequently, if that makes sense. Yeah. So that's the real big differences between this guy and this guy, is that this one has more amendment, and it has more perlite, and for faster drainage, so you could kind of keep feeding it a lot more frequently versus the pot of gold. I also use a pot too that is self-pruning pots that actually help create bigger roots. So between our mycorrhizae and then the pots, my tomato plants have really good root bases, and so that means that bigger, more roots, the more it uptakes. So the more I feed it, the more nutrients it would be able to get. Okay. More roots, more fruit. When I start something new, that it has good mycorrhizae in it, so I know that it's getting a good root system. And then that's why I like doing my tomatoes in a self-pruning pot, because then I know that pot is actually helping create more roots. On the back of our bags, we have a compost tea recipe that you could follow. It's a very simple recipe to make a compost tea. Since there is fertilizer in there, you're making a compost tea fertilizer. And I do that about maybe once to twice every week, depending. If it gets really hot, then I do it more often, just because it helps with stress. So like if it's really hot, doing a compost tea actually is kind of a stress reliever. You give them, it's like food, and they're like, oh, okay, great, thank you. And compost tea is like a Gatorade, exactly. And so I do that. The hotter it starts to get, I do it more frequently, but I like doing that a lot. Just there's a lot of benefits with compost tea. A lot of times I'll do a drench with it, and then every once in a while, depending on the time of day, I'll do a foliar spray with the tea as well, and I get all the leaves, and it really helps to prevent a lot of disease and stuff like that. This year, since it's been hot and then cold, I have tomatoes on my plant, but a lot of them are not turning right away. So, it's not a lot of times it doesn't have to do with what you're feeding it. It also has to do with the weather. Climate and temperature and stuff like that really affects certain production on stuff. Self-pruning pot. So you've heard of a smart pot. What happens is that when the roots hit the side, instead of going through, the air actually prunes the root and stops it from going, but then it shoots off more roots. And so it's called branching. And so that's what happens with smart pots or fabric bags. You actually are creating a more robust root system. With a regular black nursery can, if they sit in a pot like that too long, the roots will start to circle and choke itself out, and it's called root circling. It doesn't undo the circling. Even if you pull it out and try to pull the roots away, it already starts getting into that mode of circling. When you start seeing, especially the taproot, which almost every plant has a taproot, which is the main root that kind of helps anchor it down. Once you start seeing that starting to look like a coil, you're pretty much done. Yeah, you're going to have issues with that. So when you take a look at a fertilizer and you look at that middle number represents phosphorus, and phosphorus helps with root development. More roots means more blooms. So when you see a blooming fertilizer and that number is really high, what it's really doing, it's actually creating a better root system, because usually the more roots you have, the more blooms you have. After my tomato season, I pull it out, shake out the roots, take the roots out, whatever's left, I put that in my raised bed and start fresh with my tomatoes the next year with brand new potting soil. I wash out my pots. You could use a disinfectant, anything, let it dry, and make sure you kill any kind of germ, bacteria. Some people use bleach, some people use, rubbing alcohol, whatever. As long as it's not wet and you're using it, with wet bleach. But if you let it dry and air out and you go to next season, at least it kills everything that might be harmful to your plant. We've always been non-GMO, but we're actually now non-GMO Project Verified. They're like the gold standard of GMO verification. So if you're looking for very clean, very non-GMO, truly organic soil, we make that, and you can find it here at Orange County Farm Supply.